Welcome to the podcast of MotorWeek, television's original automotive magazine. MotorWeek is made possible by Auto Value and Bumper to Bumper and TireRack.com. Here's your MotorWeek podcast host, John Davis.
Thanks, Alec Webb. Welcome to MotorWeek podcast number 335, everybody. I am indeed your host, John Davis, and we're glad to have you with us. Now, if you're in the market for a new car, you pretty much already know that SUVs have taken over the family car market and more. So no surprise, our podcast today features three new or updated SUVs for our group to discuss. Fortunately, each of these three are very different from the others. Different as night and day in some cases. They occupy both ends of the extremes of the SUV market. And we're talking about the very refined Volvo XC90, the high-value Nissan Kicks, and the amazingly capable Toyota Land Cruiser. About as diverse a group of SUVs as you could get. And joining me today with their always diverse opinions are two-wheeling reporter Brian Robinson.
Hello, John. I pretty much always have the same opinion.
As who? As Brian?
As me.
Oh, well, at least you're true to the school. Assistant road test producer, Your Drive expert, Logan McCombs, for his first MotorWeek podcast. Logan, welcome.
Thank you. I'm super excited to be here today.
And we are excited to have you. And last but certainly not least, our digital producer, Jessica Ray.
Hey, everybody.
And Jessica, let's start with you and what's going on at Volvo. Now, recently they announced that due to shifting consumer demand, they were pulling back on their pledge to be a fully electric car company by 2030. And they're going to continue to up their game with gasoline electric hybrids, various types, and along the way, they'll still put a lot of effort into EVs. Well, they've redone their largest, most luxurious SUV, the XC90, which begs the question, how does it fit in with their more recently anointed flagship, the all-electric EX90? So tell us about this new lease on life for the XC90 and how it fits in.
Yeah, so really interesting refresh done to the XC90 because this is the second facelift that this generation has seen. And they're calling this a 2025.5. So it'll be
let's not make it even more confusing.
So basically, some of the 25 models will be the unrefreshed version, and this is starting later.
So that kind of gives you an idea of when this was decided. Anyway.
Yeah, so it's definitely a little bit of an odd situation. I went all the way to Sweden, actually, to Volvo's HQ to see this unveiled. And they really positioned it that the XC90 is still a flagship vehicle for Volvo, but it's a dual flagship with the EX90, which is the all-electric. I don't want to say all-electric version of the XC90.
It's a different vehicle.
It's a different vehicle. It's a completely different platform.
But it's like the Telluride and the
EV9.
EV9.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Same mission, similar concept, but different vehicles.
Same class of vehicle, essentially. They're both three-row utilities, size-wise, in a lot of ways. They're marketed, for the most part, to the same people. We'll say that. So, yes, they are positioning these to be dual flagship vehicles because they recognize that, the market is changing, and it's changing rapidly, and not in the ways that they had anticipated, right? They pledged to go all electric by 2030, and they're looking now to be 90% to 100% all electric by 2030. They want their sales to move in that direction, but they understand that in so many markets, the infrastructure is just not there.
Well, their dealer sales in the U.S. dropped off a cliff. So they had to be responsive, or they would come along and have vehicles to sell and nobody to sell them.
And obviously, just in the past 2 years, the incentives have also changed a lot.
Especially in Europe.
They talked about that, a big lack of incentives, because right now, Volvos do get the $7,500 tax credit, but only if you lease them. They don't qualify if you buy them, except for this EX90, that will be built here in the U.S. in the South Carolina
in their
plant.
Charleston plant, right?
So they've obviously positioned themselves in that way, but at the same time, it was a huge shift for them with the much smaller EX30, right? Remember we talked about that. I drove that in October of 2023 in anticipation that it was going to arrive here in the U.S. already at this point. But because they put 100% tariff on Chinese-built EVs, which is what the first a bit of the EX30s where they were supposed to be built, that got delayed because now they had to shift all of their North American production exclusively to the Ghent plant in Belgium, which was not at all ready, which is still being configured to build the smaller EX30s. Anyway, long story short, just Volvo is looking at the market, they're adjusting, and they're recognizing that the gasoline engine does still have a place here, which is why we're not getting an all-new XC90, but we are getting a refreshed one with some pretty significant
And we should point out, all XC90s have some type of hybrid powertrain.
Yes. And when you say hybrid, I do want to clarify.
It needs even further clarification,
yes, because what Volvo considers a hybrid is really a mild hybrid.
That's the base model.
Yes, the B5, what they call the B5 and the B6 engines, which are 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder
You want to
engines.
explain what a mild hybrid is?
Mild hybrid system essentially is you have your gasoline engine, but you have a 48-volt extra battery in there with, I believe, a small electric motor?
There's some electric motor assisted. It can either be in the drivetrain or in some cases, in the past, some of them have just been starter motors.
Yes. Yeah. So, and what it does is it kind of takes, alleviates some, what's the word I'm looking for? Pressure off the engine.
Takes some pressure off the engine, and it powers more sophisticated accessories inside the car with 48 volts.
And so, like, oftentimes when you start a mild hybrid, the starting it is actually like starting a normal hybrid, right? You really don't even hear the gasoline engine turn on. The transitions between on and off are like pretty seamless. I'm thinking of the last mild hybrids that I've driven in Volvo. I mean, it really provides a very luxurious experience when you're driving it, which is what you expect in a Volvo, something premium. So what they did was they made their 2 mild hybrids slightly more efficient by changing the combustion cycle of the engines. Now, when I say more efficient, we're still talking like under 30 miles per gallon. We don't have the EPA figures yet, but they're still somewhere in the mid to low 20s. But of course, they did a little bit of tweaks to their base engine. It sees a little bit more torque. You also have a plug-in hybrid version.
And that's really where the market is right now.
Yes, and that is a carryover, but it's still very good. There's plenty of horsepower and torque. It can go up to 32 miles if you plug it in and charge it, which is probably more than most people's daily commutes. So for the last couple of years they've been talking about how hybrids are really important for them, and we were kind of waiting to see exactly what they would do with this product, right? Because the last facelift it saw, I believe, was in 2019. So it had been a while since it had seen a facelift at all. But they did upgrade the suspension, so it should be more comfortable. I didn't get to drive it. I just saw it. So it should be more comfortable. It has better damping. The big news, too, is the interior of it. It gets a completely revised like the dashboard setup and
the screen
with
course,
the center console area.
Always pretty took up a lot of space.
Yeah, and this is a bigger screen. It goes from like 9 inches to 11.2 inches. But it's the same screen that's in the EX30 and that we've seen in their other electric vehicles. And so it's running their new. It's not really a new infotainment system, but it's like they've kind of like revamped it a little bit to have better ergonomics like on the screen itself. So one of the things about a lot of these new Volvos is they're kind of following the Tesla minimalism. I mean, Volvo is known for its minimalism, but in the same way that Tesla does, where a lot of the stuff is controlled via the screen. There are not many physical controls. And so, we drove, I'm trying to think of which car first had it. But, the last number of Volvos that we drove, you really do have to go into the menus to access a lot of things. And so this little bit of a revamped system, they have simplified things a little bit. Yes, you still have to use the touchscreen to control things like drive modes and one pedal drive and your climate, etc. But it's all like categorized now a little bit, like on like a home page.
Did you find it easier to use? Because frankly, the last version was not.
I didn't really get a chance.
Didn't really chance because you weren't driving it.
Yeah, not in like driving it, but I did. It's like everything is bigger. Like the fonts are bigger. Everything is a little bit bigger. The screen is really responsive. I think they definitely upgraded the screen itself. And then another thing that they wanted to really point out to us was the fact that they plan to support like all of the software that's in these cars moving forward, like indefinitely, which I know we've talked about. It's like, will some of these infotainment systems be obsolete in 5, 10, 15 years? And Volvo is like, well, doesn't matter. We're going to keep supporting this, which I think is important because there are, I think, OEMs who think, they're like, all right, they put out a car, you can buy it, and that's it.
And 10 years from now, it won't work, and they won't care.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's.
Let me ask Brian and Logan. I mean, we're going to talk a little bit later in this podcast about what's going on with some of these big screens, but let's talk about this very briefly. The pullback from going all electric, Volvo's done it. Ford has made announcements. GM, of course, was pledging to be all EV by 35. They're pulling back. Were you surprised this happened?
Not really. I mean, they're really just chasing headlines. They want to do each other, doing the race to EVs. But they got ahead of the market, and now they're just responding to that. I think we all talked about that before. We all pretty much saw that coming. So as far as the XC90 itself, they were way ahead of the game with that plug-in powertrain, that T8. When this gen debuted, I don't know, what is that, mid-2010s?
Yeah.
It was like 2016, I think. Yeah.
So, and they've updated it since
you're right
then.
about that.
It's a phenomenal powertrain ever since it's been out, and it's only gotten better.
Any comment, Logan?
I would say it's definitely interesting, like Brian said, that manufacturers are trying to trace the headline and be at the first and be try and get there. But I think it's harder, to be on the front line of it and do it, and then also adapting a customer base to want to accept it,
especially their customer base, which is a little older.
Right.
Yeah. And you've got probably as much gas in your vein as anybody on our staff. Did the whole idea when you first heard about it, even before you got associated with MotorWeek, about everybody shifting to EVs, did you ever just say this isn't going to happen?
As a gearhead, there was a part of me that wanted to say like, yeah, it doesn't make sense, or I didn't support it at first, but it wasn't until I got behind the wheel and was able to experience it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what a lot of people don't. That's what I tell a lot of people is like, if you haven't had the opportunity, figure out, like, go to a dealership, go somewhere to be able to test drive and experience it, because
a full EV,
right?
Yeah,
or a hybrid, because it does make a huge difference in the drivability. It's a lot smoother, and there are a lot of vehicles that they've implemented it in that you wouldn't expect it to work in, but it works really well. And I think the more people have the chance to experience it, I think they'll be a lot more open to it. Mm-hmm. Myself is a perfect example, like I said, like as someone who, is a gearhead, builds cars and likes performance, but then hearing a hybrid or a battery or something like that, it doesn't sound as exciting until you get behind the wheel and experience it.
That's good advice. Jessica, anything to wrap it up?
Yeah, I didn't mention that it gets some exterior updates. So it's like, I hate to use the word smoother, but it looks smoother, more modern, follows in line with the styling of the EX90. Gosh, saying XC and EX.
I know. Well, I'm glad
hard.
that somebody else gets confused.
But it gets like a cool, like the grille gets a cool new look to it. It's got these like crossing lines on it. They do a really awesome take on the Thor's hammer headlights as well. So yeah, I think it I wouldn't say that the last XC90 was aging, but it's like you look at this new one and you're like, whew, looks pretty good.
Thank you very much. Hey, out there, I want to let everybody know there's a new way. It's only been out a couple of months now to get everything MotorWeek as far as information. You'll see all our videos. It's the brand new MotorWeek app. It's available now from your favorite app store. It works on just about every popular phone and tablet out there, and it's 100% free, and we're not trying to sell you anything either. Along with all of our MotorWeek road test videos, it features something unique. It's an EV Everything tab, so if you're into EVs, you should look for that because it basically has the specs on every electric vehicle for sale now, both new and used. So if you're interested in more MotorWeek, go out and download the the MotorWeek app today. Get all our videos and so much more, and take it with you, and you'll never miss a mile of MotorWeek. Okay, we're going to shift our focus from the top of the SUV market to the entry level, which was where these days, I don't know about you guys, but everything seems to be so expensive that there's more and more interest starting to turn back towards value pricing. And Nissan, as a brand, has always been strong on the lower priced end of the market with high value offerings. And it looks like their all new Kicks crossover follows that formula. Nissan could use a new model right now to boost their U.S. sales, so the Kicks is well timed. Logan, tell us a lot more about the new Nissan Kicks.
Thank you, John. So one of the most interesting things about it, when you see the Kicks, when you walk up to it and you look at it compared to last year's model, is they've done a complete new redesign of the front and the rear to give it a much tougher look. Something that when you walk up to the vehicle, you feel safe when you're in it. You feel like you can get in it and you feel confident in it. You don't have to worry about it.
You don't feel like you're getting into an entry-level vehicle, a small SUV at all.
No, not at all. Funny enough, it's actually bigger, it's longer, wider, and just a bit taller to give you a bit more headroom in the vehicle. For someone like me that has a bigger stature, initially, when you think of it, it doesn't sound like a lot on paper, but when I got into the vehicle, I felt like I had a lot of room. I felt like there was space for me to be comfortable, stretch out a little bit while driving. And that was one thing I really enjoyed about it, was just the fact of how much space I had in there, how comfortable it was.
Did it seem was the center stack area and stuff, did it feel like pretty open?
Yeah, it did. It did feel very open inside on the interior, especially with the new redesign of their infotainment screen as well as your gauge cluster and whatnot. Because what they did is they gave you, on the base model, they give you a standard 7-inch screen, but the models that we were driving were the SR models, so they came with the 12-inch infotainment and 12-inch gauge cluster.
Yeah, it's almost like a dual curved screen a little bit. Yeah.
So that was nice. So it pushed it a little bit further back, which made you feel like you had a lot more dash room and space in the vehicle as you were sitting there driving it. And while I was driving it, they've actually increased the engine size from a 1.6 liter to a 2 liter. Which also gave it a bump in horsepower, which is something that Nissan saw from a lot of their consumers, that they wanted a bit more horsepower. So they were able to give that to you while also giving you a comfortable ride. And the great thing now is the fact that they have included the option for all-wheel drive. So a lot of people were saying that
it was a nice SUV, but really,
Yeah. So that was one thing that a lot of people said that they wanted in their areas, was the ability to have an all-wheel drive option. And it works really well because it's primarily front-wheel drive. But as soon as the vehicle sees the demand for all-wheel drive or it detects slip, it'll seamlessly engage those rear wheels so that you can put the power down as effectively as you need. And that also added snow mode to the vehicle, because before it didn't have that.
You know, people often overlook this. By the way, I should say this. This is a direct competitor to the Honda HR-V. Correct? Does that make sense?
So. Yeah.
I would think so. But Nissan for years have been adding more content to their entry-level vehicles than anybody else, and it's gone almost totally unnoticed by anybody except buyers. They were one of the first ones to do the 360 camera, rear view cameras, and they were putting it on the Versa and on the last generation of the Kicks when a lot of luxury cars didn't have it. So they really have honed in on this market, almost like Kia and Hyundai, and said, we're going to give you a little bit more for your money.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest things that they wanted to focus on, was being able to give you a premium experience without giving you a premium price tag. And I think they really hit the nail on the head with that, just simply because you get into the vehicle, you've got soft touch plastic all around, or soft touch materials all throughout the vehicle. On your dash, rather than it being like a faux leather, you have almost like a carbon fiber weave. That's a soft touch throughout on your dash and on your armrest and in your center console.
Yeah, the SR models, I've always been impressed, which obviously those are the loaded versions of the Nissans. Like we have a long-term Sentra right now that's an SR.
It's a very nice car.
SR Versa.
Yeah.
And the best thing about those vehicles is that to option them out, you're not talking about like, okay, from the base it's like $10,000. You're only talking about like $5,000 or $6,000 more. So yeah, they feel like a bargain. A loaded one of these feels like a bargain.
Any comment, Brian?
I think it looks much better than last gen. I do still miss the Juke, though.
How could
Nissan was way ahead of the game.
Yeah, they
as
were
far as
way
that
ahead of the
thing.
game, all right.
That Juke Nismo, man, that's still
Juke
mind-blowing.
Nismo.
Yeah, vehicle. So if they were to come out with something maybe a little more fun, once again, I think they'd be successful with it.
What was the little one that looked like a toaster? I drove that up to New Jersey.
Oh, the Cube?
The Cube, yes. That was real special. Anything to close, Logan?
I
Go
was
ahead.
going to say, to touch on that, one of the things that they did want is it to feel like something that you can dart around the city in. And it's very agile. It doesn't feel like a big SUV or anything like that. It's almost like a small car.
But small car, but it didn't feel small inside. That's a great
I
combination.
think it's supposed to get pretty decent fuel economy still too, right?
Yeah. So they're looking at 28 in the city and 35 on the highway.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Thank you very much,
Do we have
sir.
a price?
Do we have a price?
Pricing?
Yeah. So starting
Just in.
starting out on the S model, you can get it for just under $22,000 for the front wheel drive model, and then just under $24,000 on the all wheel drive.
So what's loaded? It still has to be under 30, right?
Oh yeah. And the SR model for the front wheel drive, it's right around $26,000.
See, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like that's $26,000 for the loaded one, and I'm Logan's not kidding about how those SR models feel on the inside.
It's nice looking too.
I'll do maybe a comparison, but like my Ford Maverick that I had, that
your short-lived.
My short-lived Ford Maverick. I don't think I announced that on the podcast, but yeah, I don't have that anymore. That's a long story, maybe for another day. But that was about that same price point, and that's, I'm granted, a base model, but the interior on that was so just covered in plastic, felt cheap.
It looked like a 1960s Revell model kit that had been spewed out. You wouldn't know what that
good or
looked
bad,
like.
John? Is that bad?
It was basically sheets of plastic with very little features. So.
Yeah. Okay. So but the SR, the loaded these Nissans, like it feels so much nicer than I wish I could really portray it, but I just can't do it in words, I think.
Just to stop you there, back in those days, when MotorWeek started, when you would get into just about any vehicle that was reasonably priced, the door panels looked like were a single piece of stamped plastic, and you would put when they started putting compartments in the doors so you could put, your gloves and so forth and so on. They would never trim around the edges. So you would stick your hand down there to retrieve your sunglasses or whatever, and you would cut yourself on the plastic frayed. I mean, car interiors have come a long way.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Long way.
Yeah.
Thank you both very much. All right. Now we're going to do something a little different. We've got our lightning round where we usually give each of our panelists 30 seconds to talk about a discussion. And they might hear the bell and they might not if we can't reach to it. We do have the bell. However, this one's a little different. This episode's lightning round topic comes courtesy of our own Jessica Ray. Ta-da! Last weekend, one of her tweets, or what does they call it now? Post on X? Okay.
Yeah.
It caught some major attention and controversy with over, and I don't believe this number, 25 million views and thousands of retweets and replies. What did you do? What was the subject? Okay, Jessica tells me, I'm going to ask her to explain this a little more.
Yeah.
The square Apple CarPlay integration screen on the 2025 Mini Countryman's new totally circular display, we just had that in, the admiration of the screen quickly rolled into how distracting something that large and in the middle of the dash and size might be to a driver, along with the removal of physical controls for climate controls. Did I sum that up, or do you want to elongate on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's about it. I basically
You started out innocently enough saying
I thought it was very interesting how CarPlay looked.
It's in a big square
CarPlay
inside
looked
this
on
circle.
the circular screen, because it is quite literally a perfect circle in this Mini Countryman. So they had it was really nice, like the background of the Countryman's screen was almost transparent with the Apple CarPlay. If you go on my Twitter at Jessica Ray 0, you'll scroll down a little bit and you'll see the tweet, what I'm talking about. But I thought that looked interesting, and that's the word I use. Interesting, which could be taken
and
any
then you
way.
set off a wildfire.
And yeah, it went crazy. People at first were like, yeah, that's a really cool way that they integrated Apple CarPlay. And then I go to bed, and then I wake up the next morning, and boom, it's people being like, I love that screen. I hate that screen. That seems like it could be really dangerous and blocking the view of the windshield, and there's no physical controls because unfortunately there are no physical controls.
Not much.
So yeah, it went crazy viral. You might have seen it. Who knows?
This is an interesting message to the car makers.
Mm-hmm.
If that many people reacted that way, I mean, we're starting to see some of the physical controls come back. But, let me turn it over to Brian and Logan. Forget about this particular integration. This is really now more about touchscreens replacing physical controls, and is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It all depends on how they're implemented. There's good systems and there's bad systems. I prefer touch screens to touch-sensitive control panels.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Most of them are frustrating to use and inconsistent to use. Touch screens generally work pretty well. It all depends on the size of the screen and the placement of it. How it works.
I personally don't see a larger screen as a negative. I do agree with what you're saying, Brian, is the fact that I would rather a physical button over a touch-sensitive button, just because it's a bit more tactile. It's much more comfortable. And I think one of the other things is what people were saying on your tweet is how it can be distracting, is because if you're having to menu dive and look for the climate controls, then that can be distracting to a driver. But we've started to see some manufacturers give you the option for the climate control in the touchscreen, as well as bringing back those physical buttons, which is nice.
Yeah, I mean, I have thought about this a lot, and as somebody who my arms are shorter, so it's sometimes harder for me to reach certain controls just around without being right in the face of a steering wheel,
or without leaning out away from the steering wheel.
Yeah.
And I'll bring it maybe back to my Maverick a little bit. I thought I had it was a pretty small screen that was in there in the base Maverick, but all of the climate controls were knobs and buttons, and I felt like they were laid out perfectly. Ergonomically, it felt perfect. I never had to look down at what I was doing, because I do think if you have to look down at what you were doing, And that is different than looking over at a touchscreen to check a navigation really quick. Make sure that you're making the right turn or whatever. It's because you're not really thinking. You have your hands both on the steering wheel. You look over for a second. It's almost as if you were checking a side mirror. So I do think that it's a cost-saving measure for the automakers, but it's not one that is favorable to consumers.
We're seeing a lot of knobs come back. At a minimum, people are bringing back the volume knob, thank goodness. But
even my dad's in the market for a new car, and he really likes the Tucson, Hyundai Tucson. I convinced him. He wanted to go pull the trigger and buy a 2024 a couple months ago, and I said, please wait for the 25 because they were bringing back some knobs.
Bringing back some of the knobs.
So yeah.
Hear that, everybody in Detroit and Tokyo? Bring back the knobs in Frankfurt, all the way around.
Knobs and buttons.
Knobs and buttons.
Manual transmission.
One can only hope.
What is this world coming to?
Hey, let's transition from this to a email that we got from Rick. And it sounds like a simple question. We'll see what our panel thinks about this viewer question, whether it's simple or not. When a PHEV, and that's a plug-in electric vehicle, a plug-in hybrid, runs out of battery and the gas engine takes over, does the car then operate as a normal hybrid like a Prius, a non-plug-in hybrid, or is it strictly an internal combustion engine car?
Oh, simple answer, yes. More complex answer, you never really run out of battery. The gas engine will kick in when you're about 10, 20%. But yeah, they just operate just like a regular hybrid, shut off whenever they can, maximize the battery. And a lot of them have a battery gauge so you can see kind of what charge you're earning back to be able to use later.
And there's, I guess, maybe a little asterisk on there because it's like not every plug-in hybrid is optimized as a hybrid. So like a good example might be a 4xe, right? Like a Wrangler, a Jeep Wrangler, or the Grand Cherokee. You know, with a RAV4 hybrid or like a Prius, you know, those already are like super fuel efficient, right? Hybrids, just to begin with. But usually with something like the Jeep versions, when
you run out of juice, basically you're getting the same lousy fuel economy you always did.
Actually,
is that true?
Because you've got a lot more battery weight.
More weight.
You really need to take advantage of the plugging it in.
To get the efficiency.
So yeah, the answer is yes, but it's also different a little.
Depending on depending on the mission of the vehicle.
Correct. Yeah. But yeah, just like Brian said, they will operate as normal as an ICE engine until you plug it back in, or if it, depending on how it's set up, if it recharges that battery while you're driving.
Thank you all. And speaking of being plugged in, we are very plugged into the sponsors of this podcast, into the series MotorWeek itself. We want to thank again on this podcast Auto Value and Bumper to Bumper and the folks over at TireRack.com. We know our viewers and our listeners appreciate your steadfast dedication to all things MotorWeek. Okay, back to our SUV review. All right. No grouping of new SUVs will be complete without at least one from Toyota. They sell 10 totally different ones, plus many variations of each of those. This week, we're going to talk about the return of their upscale brute, the Land Cruiser. After, I think it's a 3-year absence, it's back. And Brian Robinson, tell us more about it.
So, yeah, just some clarification as far as it going away and coming back. So there are multiple Land Cruisers available throughout the globe, and we got one of them, which was the largest one, the J200, which is a 3-row full-size truck frame. That did go cease to be sold here. What we have now is the smaller, more mid-size, now known as the J250 Land Cruiser. But they are all on the Tundra frame now, so they're all very similar. But this one is more mid-size, just 2 rows. If you want the larger 3-row full-size, which is now the J300, that's still the Lexus LX. So you can still get one, just not with a Land Cruiser badge. Okay, so now that we've gotten that out of the way, mid-size, very similar to the 4Runner, but obviously it looks more old school. They definitely wanted to get some throwback styling. It's got the old original Toyota script on the like oval grille. They are even so. There's 3 models available at launch: the Land Cruiser, and then a first edition, I think it's called, with a lot of extra stuff, and then a base 1958, which harkens back to when the Land Cruiser debuted. And that one's super stripped down, not a lot, no leather, like cloth seats, simple infotainment system, and really a great execution of what a modern off-roader should be. Looks tough. Comes with exclusively with the hybrid Max, or I guess it's iForce Max in the truck side of things. 2.4 liter, 326 horsepower, 465 pound-feet of torque. It's plenty powerful. It is, I mean, it does feel and sound like a 4-cylinder, but it is crazy torquey, so great for off-roading. Another thing...
so the smaller size makes it better for off-roading.
Well, the turbo and the hybrid assistance make it better.
No, I mean, as far as the size of the vehicle, better off-roading.
Yeah, for off-roading, absolutely. I went on the preview, got to do a ton, almost a full day of off-roading in it, and it was fabulous, whereas the bigger 200 had a lot of electronics going on, making all the off-road stuff. This one still has some of that, but it really has, you really feel in control of it, not like you're just along for the ride. It has kind of like almost an FJ Cruiser vibe to it when you're off-roading. Like I said, pretty minimalistic inside, pretty rugged. Any questions?
I think it's great that they've separated it from the Lexus and they made it, distinct. You have a choice now. You want something that's more off-road capable. You go to the Toyota brand. You step up to Lexus if you're really still interested more in a big people mover
the only
with
thing
luxury.
That gives me not pause, but worth pointing out is like 4Runner, Tundra, Sequoia, Tacoma, they're all in the same frame now. Mm-hmm. So I'm not really sure what differentiates. There's an all-new 4Runner coming out, so it'll be interesting to see exactly how different it is from the Land Cruiser. They seem to be more similar than they used to be, so we'll see.
So Logan, got any comments?
I do. We had one in recently, and I did like the minimalistic feel to it. The seats were very comfortable. It was Greg actually came out and he was telling us about how the interior reminded him of some of the older Toyotas, and it was very nice to sit in. It was super comfortable. I really liked the material that was on the seats. If anything, I love a good interior, but it was very
held you
comfortable.
in well.
Yeah, there definitely is something about the inside of that vehicle that it definitely feels old school. And then, like Logan had said, like Greg mentioned a lot, that it harkened back to that retro vibe that it's really trying to fulfill, especially with like how minimalist, like not just the seats, but like the dashboard, like everything felt like it was very purposeful, and it felt like it was durable, which is what you would want, something this is really meant to be an off-roader. And I think that's how it differentiates itself from the 4Runner. It's like, this is meant for somebody who wants to take it camping, who wants to take it off the beaten path with a lot of space.
Active lifestyle. Okay, Brian, you and Jessica both mentioned the Toyota 4Runner. A lot of, what do we know about it? It seems like we've been waiting for that to hit the dealers for a year now. So what do we know?
We know it'll be very similar to the Land Cruiser and the Tacoma that it's based on. So
it's going to have
same hybrid powertrain.
How are they going to differentiate it?
The hybrid powertrain that's in this Land Cruiser is going to be the premium version of the 4Runners. Very similar to how the Tacoma is laid out, right? It'll take that 2.4 liter gas engine, and that'll just be the base engine, and then moving up into like trail hunters and the more off-roady versions, they'll get this much torquier iForce Max powertrain, hybrid powertrain.
The 4Runner will definitely be cheaper. This one starts at 56. The Land Cruiser starts at 56 for that base 1958, which to me is the one you want. The first editions, I think, are going for like 75, if you can still get those. Wow. So the lower end of that, you get, the better vehicle you get, as far as I'm concerned. And I guess I should give you a few more details on the full-time four-wheel drive. They all are 8.9 or 8.7 inches of ground clearance, I think, and 2-speed transfer case, center, rear locking diffs. I mean, they're ready to hit the trail.
And I will say, too, another way this kind of differentiates itself is from a 4Runner is that the 4Runner is truly meant to be like the mass-produced model of this size. The Land Cruiser kind of comes in and is like, okay, it truly is for the adventure lifestyle. There's more cargo room. There's probably a little bit more interior room as well. So they'll probably sell much less units of this than the 200,000 that they're expecting of the 4Runner.
What you both are describing is they've basically taken that fairly centralized SUV market, off-roading, and divided into two price categories.
Yeah, I imagine there'll be some overlap, but yeah.
I mean, just think about how many people just buy 4Runners to just drive on the street all the time.
A lot
and
of
people will do the same thing with the Land Cruiser, but they're just offering something different or better just right out of the box.
I think that's the last word on the 2024 Toyota Land Cruiser. This is the point in our podcast where we normally turn to our panelists and say, is there anything that you want to praise or complain about? We call it our rant and rave session. Has anyone got anything to discuss? And the clock is ticking. Nothing. Oh, boy, it's going to be. All right, Logan, this is your first podcast. You have a chance to complain about anything. Well, not me, of course. Anything else that is on your mind, or what have you found that you've liked so far? We put you on the spot.
Yeah, definitely put me on the spot with that one. With all the hybrid talk that we've had, and just all the new vehicles and whatnot, and going back to like what we were talking about, like implementing it, I personally would say I've really enjoyed the experience of really getting to see how we can implement it in other ways other than just like fuel economy, which is great, but like in the Land Cruiser and in performance vehicles like the
E-Ray.
the E-Ray that we just had.
Corvette E-Ray, yeah. Because it's, like I said, like a lot of people shy away from the idea of it, but it's in my opinion, made a lot of these cars so much better and for drivability and just the sake of performance and how they perform, whether that's at the track or on a road course or anything like that. And I honestly really enjoy it. And that doesn't just stop at just hybrids, but also just the EVs, like the EV6 that we have in.
Right.
I absolutely love it.
Hard not to.
Yeah, it's very comfortable. It feels really good, but at the same time, like it's still an EV, but it has that performance factor to it.
I think he just passed his initiation, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. All right. Thanks, everybody out there, for listening to our podcast today. Thanks to our two-wheeling reporter, Brian Robinson, our digital producer, Jessica Ray, and you just heard from our assistant road test producer and your drive expert, Logan McCombs. Now, if you're wondering what time MotorWeek can be seen on your local public television station, go to our website, motorweek.org, click on the tab Watch MotorWeek, and then enter your zip code for days and times in your area, or hop over to our cable partner, mavtv.com, for their schedule. You can also watch MotorWeek and other fine PBS programming anytime, anywhere with the PBS app. So download the free PBS app now on your smartphone, tablet, or smart TV. And all of our individual road tests and features, including all of Logan's, are available at youtube.com/MotorWeek. Remember, if you've got a screen, you can watch MotorWeek. Thanks to Jessica Ray, again, our podcast producer, audio engineer David Wainwright, engineers, and Nicole Phillips-Naylor, podcast creator Bob Mixter. I'm John Davis. Thank you for being a part of MotorWeek.
You have been listening to the podcast of MotorWeek, television's original automotive magazine. MotorWeek is made possible by Auto Value and Bumper to Bumper and TireRack.com. For additional information on podcasts, videos, and showtimes, visit our website at motorweek.org. And watch MotorWeek, television's longest-running automotive magazine series, each week on your local PBS station.